January 25th, 2011, thousands of demonstrators filled Cairo's Tahrir Square, demanding the ouster of President Hosni Mubarak, in power for nearly 30 years. The once monolithic regime suddenly shaken. It was an upheaval many Egyptians expected someday, but none could have foreseen it beginning on that cool winter morning a year ago. For years, a small group of dedicated activists had braved the clubs of the security forces to protest against corruption, nepotism, police brutality, sham elections, rising poverty, a future without hope. But they needed a spark to bring out the masses.
Then Tunisia happened. That was definitely a reason, I think, that made people visually see how revolution can happen and succeed, succeed in taking out a dictator just like Mubarak.
Ibrahim took part in the planning of the January 25th protest.
One person actually said so, what if we get to Tahrir Square, then what? I mean, we didn't even believe that we would get to Tahrir Square, let alone, this would be a revolution. And the answer was, we'll figure it out when we get there. I mean, nobody imagined that this many people would turn out, that this many people would show up.
But show up they did, and occupied the heart of Cairo. For activist Nour, 20 years old at the time, it was a dream come true.
This is the start of the rest of my life, of a new, happy life, honestly. As cheesy as it sounds, it's exactly how I feel right now. Back on January 25th, I did say that this was the best day of my life. Simply because that was the first day where we broke down, where we, the population, or a segment of the population, broke down that barrier of fear for the first time. Where you hit the street and you reclaim the street for the first time in your life.
Like the Tunisians, Egyptians had lost their fear, and there was no going back. The Mubarak regime's attempts to crack down only added more fuel to the protest. Cairo University professor Ehsan Yahia suddenly saw people enraged and empowered.
And then later on the violence started to get more and more, and people said we will never be as we were. We will never go so before the 25th. And we kept hearing this statement. You keep hearing this statement from everybody. We will never go back to before the 25th.
1 year on, Egyptians are still grappling with the consequences of their courage. They've swept away the old, but hardly begun to build the new. Their country faces an economic crisis, a difficult transition from military to civilian rule, and politics that can get physical. But there's no turning back.
I was vice president of the Red Party in 2005 when we challenged Mubarak for the presidency, and nothing worked. Nothing worked to even help us share power.
After 20 years of peaceful activism, publisher and human rights advocate Hisham had enough.
We did not want to take power, but we wanted to be involved in making policy for the country. So I thought, okay, I've done all that, nothing worked. If a demonstration and throwing rocks at the paramilitary will do it, I will do that. On 28 January, I went out for the first time in my life in a demonstration. I have never demonstrated. I don't like demonstrations. It's not a way for me to express myself. But that day, I went out and joined the young kids.
Nobel Peace Prize laureate Mohammed Elbarady had rushed back to Cairo to take part.
I went on the 28th, and that's that day of anger, as they call it, when the 40,000 turned into, I don't know, 500,000 or 1 million, and when we started getting the water cannon and gas and all sorts of things. I realized that at that day that we started the process and there is no end to it.
The Egyptian army doesn't like getting involved in keeping order, but on that fateful day it was sent in to relieve the police, outnumbered and overwhelmed. The soldiers were greeted as saviors. The regime's supporters played one last desperate hand. On February 2nd, they tried to storm Tahrir Square, joined by men on horseback and camels.
If I had said before that January 26th was the best day of my life, the Battle of the Camels, the 2nd of February, was the worst day of my life, because that was the first day where we actually felt that the Egyptian population was prone to turning against one another. At the time we thought that it could even turn into something similar to a civil war.
The Battle of the Camels was a turning point, the day the regime showed it was politically bankrupt. 9 days later, Mubarak was gone.
All of a sudden he cries and he screams, and so I immediately knew then that he had stepped down. So I just throw everything and I start rushing out of the shop and walking down Talat Hal towards Tahrir, and I just start hugging everybody. Everybody's crying, everybody's cheering, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar.
I mean, my tears were just going. I never felt so happy. I never felt so elated. I never felt so liberated.
I went down to the square, and it was jubilant, and we were celebrating. I kept bumping into old activists I've worked with against Mubarak for the last 20 years, and it was almost tears of joy.
But even then, Ehsan Yahya had mixed emotions. The impossible had been achieved, but the future looked so uncertain.
And I feel so happy and I feel so sad. I feel so happy because I remember the happiness and the joy of all the people there. But I feel so sad because we thought it's the end. It was the beginning.
Hyundai's new thinking understands one thing perfectly, that all things are linked. This inspires us to create new possibilities that link all of us. Hyundai, new thinking, new possibilities.
Destination Bahrain, a nation on a journey.
Reshape the global economy. All this week, world leaders are in Davos to find a way forward. And CNN's Richard Quest, John Defterios, Poppy Harlow and Fareed Zakaria are there. We'll break down the issues and get answers from the decision makers. CNN's coverage of the World Economic Forum, all this week on CNN.
A week after Mubarak resigned, hundreds of thousands crammed into Tahrir Square for what was declared a day of pride. Egyptians were in a state of elated shock. Mubarak was gone, the country free at last.
This is the first time Egyptians are all together. We're always divided. We have so many classes and so many people are from different education, and But this time, everybody was there. Everybody was in the street, kids and rich and poor and women, and everybody was there. So it felt like we are one.
But it didn't take long for reality to set in. Egypt's new ruler was the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, led by Mubarak's defense minister, Field Marshal Mohammed Tentawi. SCAF, as it became known, talked the talk of the revolution. But very soon the high hopes of the revolutionaries collided with the military's desire for order. In Tahrir Square and beyond, the new regime was starting to look an awful lot like the old one.
The event that crystallized the idea of the army being a continuation of the Mubarak regime was the 9th of March. The 9th of March, when military police forcefully evacuated the Tahrir area of the demonstrators or the protesters who were sitting in Tahrir Square, where they took a huge number of activists and demonstrators into the Egyptian museum and tortured them for hours.
The Egyptian military has denied allegations that it has tortured or beaten detainees, but pro-democracy activists now knew that powerful and well-entrenched forces were arrayed against them.
This is also when virginity checks had taken place on some of the female demonstrators. This is when we knew that the revolution has not begun yet, that the 18 days were merely an uprising, and that the revolution is still in its beginnings, if not is yet to begin.
Revolutionaries like Ibrahim increasingly saw SCAF as pushing a counter-revolution, a new head on an old body.
Their interests lie against the revolution's interests, so by default they're going to attack it. So they're going to try the protesters in military courts. They're going to try, anybody who speaks against the SCAF, like we've seen the many cases of activists who have been summoned or tried or even sentenced for something that they wrote on their blog or they tweeted. I mean, this is absolutely unacceptable.
Unacceptable, maybe, but to human rights advocate Hisham, no surprise.
Their democratic credentials are non-existent. The state requires different human resources. Okay? That's on one hand. On the second, are military capable of economic and political reform? And the answer is no.
The men in uniform seem to stumble from one catastrophe to another, says Mohammed Elbarady.
The army, got this hot potato on their lap. They didn't expect to happen. They have zero experience in managing a country politically, and they started to make one mistake after the other.
A pattern began to emerge. Protests followed by a bloody crackdown, followed by violent clashes. In November, street battles raged for days just off Tahrir Square. Dozens were killed, thousands wounded. With a sense of deja vu, the protesters, now demanding that SCAF and Field Marshal Tentawi step aside.
1,000-mile journey starts with one step. There hasn't been a step. If people would believe that seriously that Tentawi and his gang are doing anything for us, we really wouldn't say anything. Yeah. Just show us a step, show us a plan.
Their plan, their promise of parliamentary and presidential elections and a shift to civilian rule has a hitch. The military council wants to preserve the army's vast business empire and prevent civilian oversight of the military budget. In essence, they want to maintain their state within a state. The army stood its ground. Protests spread. Outside the office of the Prime Minister, the extent of the military's heavy hand was exposed. The military council didn't seem to realize that Egypt has changed beyond recognition. A people once silent had found its voice and wasn't going to simply shut up and obey. They could no longer be beaten and intimidated into quiet submission.
We are not like before. We will not just wait and see what you are doing. We are now part of our country. We want to know what are you doing and why you are doing it.
While the activists were transfixed by the drama in the streets, other Egyptians had more down-to-earth concerns. The economy had come to a halt, tourism had evaporated, and law and order seemed to be breaking down. For many, the revolution was losing its luster.
A lot of people, your average Joe, what has he seen of the revolution? The economy is going down, he's being unemployed, prices are going up, security is not there.
The government is now negotiating with the International Monetary Fund for a $3 billion standby loan. Economists estimate that a quarter of young people are without work.
You have now people on the street saying, I thought this revolution was for me, but I've been jobless for the last 3 months. You see, the turmoil that followed the ousting of Mubarak, which in a way was natural. There was a lot of anger. People were venting anger, frustration. But it did a lot of damage to the economy. People lost jobs. Things certainly did not get any better on any level except freedom.
One day I will be Wedeman. One day I will be a rock star. One day I will be a dancer. One day I'll be Prince Champion.
It's time to make dreams come true.
Elegance is an attitude. Lawson. Nokia Lumia with new CNN app.
November 28, 2011. A quiet but momentous day in Cairo. Voting stations opened at 8 a.m. for the first post-Mubarak parliamentary elections.
I feel great. I feel my vote will change Egypt to a better future. I'm 47. This is my first time too.
And how are you feeling?
I'm feeling great because it's for our kids' future. Because otherwise, everybody will leave this country if it goes down the drain.
For a country racked by months of unrest, shaken by street clashes, worn down by a faltering economy, the elections were, for most, a breath of fresh air.
It's an indicator that democracy will have its way in Egypt, because the most important thing was participation. And from a turnout of 8%, in which at least 5% were bussed by force by Mubarak to go vote for his party, to an average of 62%. We have a 54% new voter turnout, and that was the most important thing.
Egyptians turned out in their millions, but to some involved in the revolution from day one, the vote was a distraction.
This parliamentary election is a whole show. It's just a show to end this revolution. Say, okay, now you have your parliament, now you elected these people, now your fight is with these people, and it's taking away the revolution from the street.
And only the street could push the military from power. Others felt the vote did matter because it mobilized the people of Egypt.
For the first time, Egyptians feel that their voice and their vote count and could make a difference. The fact that people would go down and stand for hours in line just to give their vote, this is unprecedented, and it's a good step regardless of the outcome of this parliament.
The outcome was a victory for the Muslim Brotherhood's newly formed Freedom and Justice Party, which won almost 40% of the seats in Egypt's lower house. Hounded by the authorities for decades, their moment had come. And it was a moment they favored.
قبل أن أرد
احب اقول لحضرتك ان احنا في مثل هذا التوقيت.
At this time a year ago in 2010, in this exact place, we were beaten and dragged on the ground to stop us from voting, recalls Muslim brother Abdulaziz Zayed. But now the future before us is great.
45,000 of them went to prison, during Mubarak's time. They had obviously the sympathy of the people. They have always been on the ground. They have been providing services when the government failed to provide services, healthcare in mosques, education, and they have been presented as God-fearing people.
Another God-fearing party did well too, the hardline Salafist party, which won over 20% of the vote. Ehsan Yahya initially supported the Salafi Nour party, but was disturbed by their attitude toward women and relations with Egypt's Coptic Christian minority.
The thing I don't like about the Salafis is that they said we shouldn't be friends, you are not like me. They have this strange idea. We have been in Egypt living all our lives, Muslims and Christians, and we have been friends and neighbors and helping each other, and we never feel the difference.
For now, the future of Egypt's democracy lies not in the hands of politicians, but with the generals. A presidential election is set for June, but will the military, as it promises, cede power and its special perks to a civilian government? Eventually, yes, says Hisham Qasim, but not yet.
Right now, with the top brass in the military, they will not do that, okay? And they have personal interests to protect. But over a period of 5 years, they will, starting 5 years from now, when you began to build the instruments of good governance and democracy, a proper judiciary, parliament, and establish civilian rule, the military will have to give up their privileges.
Mohammed Elbarady recently pulled out of the presidential race, accusing the military of being little more than an extension of the old regime. Nonetheless, he's optimistic that Egypt is ultimately on the right course.
There is no going back, for sure. For one single important reason. The culture of fear is gone and gone forever. You tell me, you look at any of these guys anywhere in Egypt and tell them you will not be able to protest. If you are angry, you will not be able to call for your rights, and you will see the answer you get. So that is, and I think everybody, whoever is going to govern Egypt, any regime, they will know that if there is people power, and people power is here to stay.
In the last year, a generation has undergone a crash course in the power of protest, power they're not about to relinquish.
Being a revolutionary myself and being in the streets and taking part in these clashes, you know that all these people are fighting for a better Egypt. They don't have hidden agendas. They don't get finance from abroad. They are simply fighting for their rights. They're fighting for a better living, and they're not going to stop because we sacrifice so much. We sacrifice so much to reach to where we are now that there is no way of going back.
Egypt's revolution is far from over, but there's a spirit and determination that sustains it.
We knew from day one that this wasn't going to be easy, and if you fought against the Mubarak regime, you were fighting against it not because you thought it was easy. You knew it was difficult at the time, and since you're fighting the remnants of the Mubarak regime, and we also know right now that it's not going to be easy. But I personally don't have any other country to go to.
And Egypt's revolutionaries are ready for a struggle that transcends generations.
I was born here, I was raised up here, all of my family and my friends are here. I'm going to live here, I'm going to raise my children here. So it will be difficult, but this country is worth it.